Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us Team Mosso at the1916company.com for all of your purchase, pricing, and availability questions concerning this watch. So today we are discussing the Roger W. Smith Series 1 made on the Isle of Man. This is the latest version of the Series 1 as built since 2015. Now in 2015, Roger Smith, famed for building the watch in its entirety by the most manual methods, he launched 4 new or redesigned models, and this is the latest Series 1, and I say that because there was a prior Series 1, his first product from 2001. He only made 9 of those. Those were rectangular with a retrograde date, so don't confuse this with that. Now, there are 2 different case sizes and several different metals. This one is white gold. You can get it in 38 or 40 millimeters. This is the 40 millimeter case size. It's 46.9 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, 13.7 millimeters thick. And then it has an idiosyncratic lug spacing of 19.5 millimeters. And no matter how I measure it, it's 19.5. So keep that in mind if you're getting a custom strap. The lugs are drilled very close to the case, which keeps the pivot centers narrow for better small wrist fit. To prevent any impingement or impediment to the motion of the strap, a curved spring bar is used. If you are going with a custom piece here, keep in mind that there's quite a bit of swelling and bolstering as the strap approaches the case. So you're going to have to make sure that it does increase in volume as it approaches the lug profile. Now we have kind of a distressed texture to this large rectangular scale, symmetrical scale alligator leather strap, which gives it a bit of a matte finish. It's got a folded edge and a monotone stitch. And on the bottom, a feature that I tend to associate with bigger brands, a rubber inlay to create a more supple feel against the skin and also to protect the strap against the moisture, heat, grit, and sweat and oil of the wrist. So this is something I associate with like the Blancpains and Zeniths of the world. I'm really happy to see it here. I assume that these straps are easier to come by than his watches, but production might still be kind of slow going considering how handmade everything is. So a longer lasting Smith strap is welcome. A few things going on here with the buckle. First, you can see it's white gold like the case, R.W. Smith, and then we roll around. You can see, reverse all this, so you can see the hallmarks. The hallmarks are the same you will find on the case. And so you can see, among other things, the maker's mark of Roger W. Smith. So he made the case. We have the little combination of the crown and 750, which means British 18-karat white gold. You've got the little cat right there, the tiger. That means assayed in London. Y means 2023. The watch is fairly simple externally. Historically inspired unbranded crown, no maker's mark on that. The mid-case is defined by the overlapping flange of the symmetrically shaped case back and bezel. It's rounded, it's polished, the lugs are welded on. This is a very handmade watch that includes the case. The lugs inserted into slots in the case. They're made separately, welded together, and then filed and finished by hand to create that super sharp break between the metals. So that's what you're looking at there. And of course, there's a little bit of homage to Daniel in the shape of this case. Smith, from 1997 on, the apprentice and later collaborator and business partner of George Daniels, who was a very innovative British watchmaker, a very important innovator on many different levels, but he had a very strong design ethic. Things had to be fairly simple, highly legible, and when we get to the movement, we'll talk about finishing. The dial here, again, pays great homage to historic British watchmaking from the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, but also to the way Daniels tended to create his dials. You can see that the dial has been engine-turned. We've got sort of a cross-hatching basket weave at center, and then a pyramide for the sub-seconds disc. The dial's made of many different pieces, including the nameplate, the track for the seconds, the track for the minutes outboard. We have individual indices as well as tri-Roman numerals radially arrayed. There are signs here that this is made by hand. And by that, I mean incredibly skilled hands, but still not robots. There are little flaws that are beautiful because you can see that a human being was here. For example, all of these little dots on the minute track are filled by hand with blue lacquer. And so is the nameplate. And if you look at the right-hand side of the W, you can see that the lacquer ran just a little bit. When I say it's imperfect, I mean things like that. You can also see on the left-hand side of the W, the little dip at the bottom features some overflow. So I'm talking about things like that. little tiny things that indicate a human being did this. There's a warmth to the human hand that's missing from machines. Machines don't make mistakes. I'm happy that a living, breathing person was here. And by the way, let me talk about how handmade these watches are. In a good year now, with his new workshop since 2018, Smith is probably making about 10 to 15 watches a year, probably about 12. From 2001 to 2021, he made about 100 watches. So that gives you an idea of the rate of production when you are truly making the whole watch by hand. And the hands are made by hand. So you could see polished and mirrored at the center on a mirrored cannon pinion. We have these lovely hands that feature polishing, rounding, and a tapered end that looks sort of like the mantle of a squid. And you can also see we've got a lovely polished center to the lancet seconds hand with a polished counterweight. And then the shaft of the hands, the end, the indices, and the numerals, all given a short disciplined firing to get this lovely violet brown color. If you just saturate metal with heat and oxygen, it'll turn dark blue. You need a more disciplined short hold in the heat to create this color right here. Okay, little note, by the way, the watch does feature hacking seconds, so you can set it to the second. And there's very little dead angle in the setting. Also, there's zero wobble to the crown. This feels like a well-made product. Even though it's handmade, it is not crude. I have encountered a lot of very low-volume watches where the setting or the stop seconds or something about the winding just doesn't feel like it's quite ready for prime time. This feels like it was thoroughly refined before being brought to market. So, an all-British-made watch with homage to Daniels and history. So in terms of history, we have this lovely floral hand-engraved crown wheel and ratchet wheel cover. We also have a freehand engraved balance cock. We have a large 3/4 bridge over most of the train. And then you can see it's been frosted. Now, historically, this probably would have been done with acid. I suspect Smith does it with a wire brush. That's one of the primary ways of doing this today. It's how Grubel Forsey does it. But Roger Smith, if you're out there, correct me if I'm wrong. You'll also note that there is zero beveling here. Daniels was not a stickler for gilding the lily. He did not like to over-decorate, so you're not going to see anything in the vein of Romain Gauthier, Ferdinand Berthoud, or Lang und Heine. The idea is to make it look like a Daniels, but more refined. Daniels was also sometimes crude. He was about engineering and innovation, and when the watch was competent to operate and achieve his stated purpose, he'd pretty much stop there and move on to the next thing. Also, historically, mile-wide rounded anglage was not a big part of British watchmaking in the classical era of Tompion, Arnold, Harrison, Earnshaw, and this really pays tribute to that. You can see one unique feature of these that I don't see on a whole lot of other watches. These golden wheels are all mirror polished. We also have rose gold chaton fixing the pivot jewels because back in the pocket watch era, it was generally easier to make a precision golden cup, press the jewel into that, and fit it to the movement, the bridges and plates, using screws. So you can see the screws, too, here have that lovely, unique tone that we saw in the hands on the dial. So something to note, there's design parallelism here. We have the Triskelion, which is the symbol of the Isle of Man, where this watch is made. And, of course, that is on their flag. That is the symbol of the country. Let me give you a quick wrist shot before we jump deeper in, because we're going to talk about the machine in a moment. Let's talk about the ergonomics, the man-machine interface. Easy watch to wear, though it is thick, like almost all versions of the coax, and this is probably one of the thinnest. It's got a little bit more girth to it. Also, the depth of the movement, where the bridge is held up by pillars over the base plate, another vintage tribute and a marine chronometer tribute at that, but it does create a little bit of bulk. It should fit easily under a cuff just because it has a domed bezel, but I would recommend this watch for a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference and larger. Otherwise, you're going to want to look for 38 millimeter Series 1. So back here, you can see when I talk about this being a pillar movement, Jean-Antoine Lepine in the roughly 1760s created a innovation in movement construction where the bridge is set directly on top of the plates. Prior to that, it was always a pillar holding the plate above the, or I should say the bridge above the plate. So here you can see that the bridge is actually held. There's quite a bit of volume between the base plate and the 3/4 bridge, and you can see that really well from this angle. So just keep in mind, in terms of its architecture, it's also modeled after a vintage watch. Now we have, surprisingly, a free-sprung balance. Smith calls this quadradjust, and it really is more shock tolerant and easy to adjust precisely. This is something that is very contemporary and not a throwback in any way. So you've got this lovely mirror finished steel stud holder, then you've got a balance beating away at 2.5 hertz and these little rose gold masses that are used to adjust the timing. It's not susceptible to shock-induced timing deviation, and it can be adjusted very precisely. You can also see underneath it, we have that little fired escape wheel, and that is the single wheel coax. So this movement design, the basic architecture, the color, shapes, tropes, and tones of the dial, all inspired by the Great Britain watch of 2013. So although that had a Union Jack cut into a much more complicated dial, the color, the basic layout, the fired tones of this dial are designed to evoke the Great Britain watch. The movement architecture here was also trialed on the Great Britain watch, and so was dramatic reduction of the complexity and the mass of the single coaxial escape wheel. Of course, George Daniels, he created the coax back in 1974, and he spent most of the next quarter century trying to sell it to a brand that would have the courage to industrialize it. Omega did, and Daniels actually had a hand in the initial pieces to come off the line. He was aided in that endeavor by Derek Pratt, but I digress. This is the single wheel coax, so reducing it to its greatest and one might even say most simple expression. So you have these extended escape teeth, and they extend off the wheel, which is turning counterclockwise, and then you can't quite see, but there are these crenellated towers that rise off the inner diameter of the wheel, like a column wheel on a chronograph or the escape wheels on a Breguet natural escapement. So they're coaxial, they're on one pivot, they are on the same axis as they turn, but they are on different parts of the wheel. Now, there are two beautifully finished rose gold bridges that are probably the two most elaborately finished parts of the movement. One holds the escape wheel, one holds the triple stone lever. There are actually 3 pallet stones in the lever. Now, the wheel impulses the roller table of the balance directly via an impulse jewel that sits on the roller table, and then you have those 3 points of contact with the 2 different levels of the coaxial escape teeth, and so the lever also imposes its impulse on the balance. So it's a double impulse system that is direct and indirect. Now, what makes it special, and why Daniels went through all this trouble, is that it creates tangential friction against the impulsed surface, which means unlike the sliding friction of a Swiss lever during the run to banking and the impulse, here you have tangential friction, so the lift angle effectively is very, very low, and the result is better chronometry, less maintenance required, less lubricants required. It should operate completely unlubricated, and in theory it can also extend the power reserve, although that's not the point here. This watch has a 36-hour power reserve, and that is precisely calculated to be wound exactly 24 hours apart. Smith optimizes his mainspring curve for the first 24 hours, so you always want to wind it daily at the same time. It is not something that's designed to go for days on end. This is not a 2000s era Volflurier Eric Klein designed Panerai movement. Wind it every 24 hours at exactly the same time to make the most of the mainspring curve and the force from the going barrel against the coax. And all this is 30 meters water resistant. If you love this watch, reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.